for me, it's like, how do you use remanufacturing beyond a trend, right? Patchwork is a trend that sometimes comes and goes,
Yeah.
And it's associated with upcycling. People love using the word upcycling, right? So for me, when I started working at Eileen Fisher, it was like, how do we make garments that they do not look like they're made out of garments, so we can actually start putting them into the line and not even really making a big deal out of it. You just label, on the care and content label, this is made out of garments, and the content of the fiber or whatever. So that has been one of my biggest passions at Eileen Fisher. And I think we've achieved it. We do create, but I mean, there's a lot of repetition on materials and styles by the thousands that we get at Eileen Fisher that allows that, right? So we do t-shirts, we do, jumpsuits and jackets that you literally grab them and you're like, I had no idea that this was made out of garments. The design is elevated. It's simple. There's a lot of seams, but you have to play with the seams in the design, accordingly.
1% of clothes are ever actually recycled back into new clothes. In a report by the EPA, Americans in 2018 generated over 17 million tons of textile waste. That's over double what we created just 2 decades before. Now, brands play a critical role in the supply chain, sitting in between consumers and the supply chain. They dictate the dominant business models that fuel our ecosystem. Unfortunately, most business models rely on newness to drive constant growth through consistent consumption, and they manufacture this type of demand. Anticipating buying patterns, large distribution channels, and other components create an oversupply of product that doesn't always get sold. A lot of businesses are known to burn their products when it's done, slash their products when they're done, destroy their products if it's unsold, because they don't want to create an oversupply and reduce their brand image in a way. Their business models and the cost of their garments also don't take into account the externalities of their sold garments into the price, whether that be the environmental or social impact of their garments. Brands set the pace for the industry between consumers and the upstream supply chain. Right. Following the manufacturing of a garment, the life moves into the ownership of the brand, who originally ordered the product and push it on to consumers. And they also profit the most from the sale of the clothes. Now, we're really lucky to speak to someone who is a pillar in the sustainable fashion space, who's able to give us a peek behind the scenes of a brand who's really leading the charge in ethical material sourcing and manufacturing and providing responsible take-back programs for their consumers. Eileen Fisher, a brand named after its founder, focuses on creating casual and timeless women's wear, responsibly made and well manufactured from luxurious natural fibers and materials. And Carmen Gama is the director of circular design at Eileen Fisher and manages their take-back program. She's also the founder of Make ANEEW. It's a one-stop shop for circular fashion that recovers value at scale from post-consumer clothing. They offer unique services to bring post-consumer clothing back to life through sanitization, repair, and remanufacturing, as well as fiber-to-fiber recycling. Carmen is an expert in circular fashion, sitting at the forefront of effective take-back programs and remanufacturing. In this conversation, we get to dive into a lot of her work, both at Eileen Fisher and Make ANEEW, how brands should approach take-back programs and remanufacturing, as well as how brands should approach circularity. We're in for a treat with this chat. Well, Carmen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. You are such an accomplished figure in this space, so I know that our audience has a lot to learn from you. But before we jump into it, I'd love to start with kind of taking a step back and understanding who Carmen is as a person, and how you came from Mexico to New York and got into this sustainable fashion space in the first place.
Oh my God, do you have 10 hours? But I'm going to keep it very short. So I was born and raised in Mexico. My whole family is there. That's why I travel a lot to Mexico. I have a huge family. I grew up in a house, a very creative house. My dad is a shoe designer, and my mom, she was a seamstress. Home housewife, but seamstress too. So she taught me how to sew. So I kind of grew up in that space. So I always design was into my DNA. And then when I graduated from high school, I knew that I wanted to study fashion design, but my parents could not afford to send me to study, abroad. So I came here as an au pair. And then I convinced my parents because they did not want to let me go. They were like, "You an au pair? What are you talking about? You've never worked in your life. How are you gonna go to another country and take care of a kid?" And I'm like, "I
Yeah.
can do it because I want to study fashion there."
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up here in New York. And a couple of years later, I was very lucky to land also in Parsons. So I studied fashion there. I did my BFA in fashion there. And that's where things really kind of like changed for me in the direction of design that I wanted to follow, which was more like a sustainable lens, right? And addressing waste. But yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell where I come
Gotcha.
from.
That's fair enough. So then what drew you to Eileen Fisher first and foremost?
I actually did not know about Eileen Fisher, right? Because it's normally for, people tend to say, "Oh, my mom wears Eileen Fisher and my grandma wears Eileen Fisher." I did not grow up with Eileen Fisher in my house in Mexico, right? So I was in my last year of Parsons senior, and my senior thesis year. And one of my teachers, she told me, she was like, "Hey, there's this competition coming up about sustainability where it's about Eileen Fisher, and they're looking for 3 people to come and, just kind of like be part of the company for a year. I think this is something that you will like because you're focusing on that area of the industry." And I was like, "Who's Eileen Fisher?" I have no idea. But then I went into really diving into who Eileen Fisher was, what they were doing. And I really got interested. I mean, the only thing that I was just like, "Oh, Eileen Fisher doesn't follow my aesthetic." It's like, it's not my aesthetic, but the
for sure.
values are there. So I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. And it's because I think I wanted to work more like for like an outerwear company, because that's what's I like. I love outerwear. But I didn't want to move to California. So, I wanted to do Patagonia, but I'm like, California, oh.
Sure.
So then I applied to this competition, and I was one of the 3 winners. And the other 2 girls were my friends from Parsons. So the 3 of us, because he was open to all the United States schools.
Sure.
So yeah, that's how I ended up in Eileen Fisher.
Gotcha. And you've been there since. You really made a name for yourself there.
9 years. Oh my
9 years.
God. August was 9 years. I can't believe it.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yes.
Coming up on 10. That's a big one.
Yes.
As the director of circular design, I mean, it may be obvious for many, but I think that when it comes to the position of a brand and circularity as a main topic, not just in fashion, but in the sustainability circles around the world, no pun intended, how does Eileen Fisher specifically, and then I'd love to learn more about Make ANEEW as well, how does the circularity component to Eileen Fisher help transition not just Eileen Fisher, but the fashion industry forward towards a more sustainable future?
Yes, I think we have an internal saying that is like, we're the fairy godmother of the industry in that sense, where we truly help the industry by example. We lead by example, right? Through our first life garments, through our supply chain, safe chemistry, responsible materials, fair trade, all the way to we are responsible for when the customer no longer wants the garment, right? So we are an example that if you want, you can do it, right? And then we also do a lot of training, and we are very transparent with our processes, right? Because we truly want the industry to change. So if a company, a peer designer comes and say like, "Hey, what are the factors that you're using? Hey, what are the supply, what kind of chemistry you're using?" Like, or in this post-consumer supply chain, what are your third parties that you're working with for resale, or like for downcycling, upcycling, all of these things. We love sharing that information. We don't keep it to ourselves, because again, it doesn't matter if we just do it ourselves. We're so tiny compared to other huge brands. So it's like, that's how we can contribute to the industry, right? And that's something that I'm kind of like trying to push right now for fiber to fiber recycling. That's kind of like the thing that I'm very passionate about. Like, we're doing it internally. So it's like, how do we do it internally and stream it so other brands can follow and take the lead too? So I think that's the way on how we can help lead the change in the industry to become circular.
You mentioned fiber to fiber recycling, which we'll get into in a second. And for the record, of course, Eileen Fisher does a lot more than just using, recycled fiber and whatnot, which again we'll get into momentarily. But I'm just curious to know, again, before we dive deep, Carmen, why is circularity important to you personally? Why is that the component of sustainable fashion that drew you throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can go back to the where I'm coming from, right? I
Yeah.
think it's important because those are the values that my parents, especially my mom, taught me, right?
Mhm.
From a very young age. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. So all of the resources that we had were put towards education, right? They really care that the only inheritance that we were going to get is like education. Like if they give us right education, we would, grow as, professionals or
Yeah.
whatever we wanted to do. So, whenever it comes to clothing or yeah, especially clothing in this case, it's like my mom taught us how to make our own garments. We use patterns, we use newspapers as paper to make our dress. So one, because she truly believed that paper, it's like we don't want to waste paper. One, because it came from trees, and two, because we didn't want to buy new paper, right?
Mhm.
That she can use that money for something else. So I repurpose a lot of her clothing. Oh my God, I butcher a lot of her clothing, but she never like really said anything to me. So again, I came through that environment of like responsible and be resourceful.
Mhm.
None of that clicked until I came to United States and learned about the huge waste culture that the global North is, right? I'm
Mhm.
like, oh my God, people just buy clothes and like dispose of them so
Mhm.
easily. And for
Mhm.
me, it was just like when I was younger, it's like, no, you get to have these 5 pieces of garments and work with them and like be creative. So that's when I was just like, oh no, I want to be a designer, but I don't want to create waste.
Mm.
I want to use my talent to create designs from these garments that we already have. So I think that's circularity was not even a term for me even when I
Yeah.
was in school, right? Circularity just came years later. But for me, it was very obvious. It's like why we're using virgin materials when we have so much already out there that we can use to make new garments. And that's how I was brought up. And that's how, you know, that's where I landed, I
Yeah.
guess.
No, for sure. And I mean, again, I think you're spearheading it more than anyone else. I think, as someone who obviously isn't necessarily like the typical buyer of Eileen Fisher, I've known of Eileen Fisher equal to many bigger brands in terms of its impact in the sustainability space. When you go to conferences, when you research sustainable fashion in general, Eileen Fisher is always one of the leading brands that sort of speaks about it and lives its values. So I definitely think that you guys are making a big impact. But let's take a look at your, Carmen isn't just the director of circular design. You are a founder of a business that's again providing real services to enable a circular fashion. So can you tell me more about Make ANEEW and how that came to be from the get-go?
Yes, because I can't stand still, right? I have to just do a million things. That I also blame that to my mom. um, how did I Make ANEEW came about? Okay, so when I started working at Eileen Fisher, I met my best friend with Carolina Bedoya.
Mhm.
We bonded through her daughter. She was 6 months old, so I literally was first her friend of the 6 month old and her. Anyway, so we created like this beautiful relationship, and
Mhm.
through her daughter and also through the passion for really building a system that scales and making out of garments. So
Mhm.
we both work on these along with at the same time the other two girls from Parsons, Lucy and Tesla and Dowd. We really focus on that. But when they left, Carolina and myself really work on this. So we had a lot of passion. And then as the years came back, we always give tours to schools, institutions, brands. So everybody came and they left saying like, oh my God, we want to do these. How do we do it?
Mhm.
We don't have the resources, we don't have the knowledge, but we want to be part of these. And this is when resale was still the beginning. We were one of the first ones.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
people were so like, there was not a lot of resale platforms or like
Yeah.
service providers out there. So me and Carolina were like, you know what, we need to, at some point in our lives, we have to offer these solutions because we cannot just retain the expertise here. We
Mhm.
have to help brands do it,
Mhm.
because brands should not be doing this on their house. Like this is not, and it's like you don't own your first life factory. Why would you have to own these part of the operation yourself?
Mhm.
So anyway, the pandemic came, and you know, I was reduced to half of my time on working time, so we had a lot of time in our hands. And again, because I can't you know, sit still, and nor can she, so we were like, just like, what do we do? What do we do? Like, we should be doing something. And then at that time, a peer from the industry, she reached out, and she was one of the top 10 resellers at Poshmark. She's like, hey, I have all of these garments that we want to repair. Do you know anyone? And that's when it clicked for us. We're like, we can do it. I mean, by all means, I can't repair anything. I'm like terrible, so I had nothing to do with it. Or at least I try. And then Carolina was like, you know what? Stay away from it. I was putting more work on for her than anything. So we that's how we started. We started with clients, and then from there we're like, she just kept giving us product to repair. And then, you know, she has a huge basement that now it's her studio. So that's how we started the pandemic, and from there we always had clients, you know.
Gotcha. So it was first a repair business. Are you guys offering services outside of just garment repair?
Okay, so what's Make ANEEW? So Make ANEEW is a circular design recycling center that offers solutions for pre or post consumer garments, right? Like idle inventory, clothing that the brands no longer can resell or sell, or they're too damaged, right? So it can be through a form of repair, remanufacturing. And even though we have the expertise of fiber to fiber recycling right now, we don't offer that. But hopefully in the future we do, or downcycling, because we do have the partners to do that. So we offer that. We started through repair, right? But then we moved pretty quickly into remanufacturing, because that's basically what we're known for in the industry. And a lot of brands are very much interested in remanufacturing, which is the act of using the garment as fabric to make entirely new clothes.
Taking garments and using garments as fabric to make new clothes.
Yes.
You use this term remanufacturing a lot throughout your own literature and in your business, but I think a lot of people just sort of bucket what you do under this idea of like circularity. Do you have any difference between the word circularity and remanufacturing? Can you tell me your thoughts on the two? What distinguishes the two?
Yeah. So circularity is the act of, you know, it's like producing a garment, right? Selling it. That garment comes back to the supply chain for either resell, right, if it's in good condition, or repair if it has like a flaw, or remanufacture if it's beyond wear, or recycling, right? So it's not one or the other. It's like all of the options to help close the circle, so the garment doesn't end up in the landfill. So it's like stages, right? You're a company, you produce it, the customer no longer wants to wear it, and if it's in great condition, then technically you should be, as a company, offering a platform or a partnership for that person to resell the garment. But if it's too damaged, then what are the other options so this garment doesn't end up in the landfill? Again, it's repair, remanufacture, fiber to fiber recycling, or downcycling. Those are the solutions to put those garments back into the supply chain as raw goods, or I get that.
Now, going back to the idea of starting this company, you were always an employee. You were always a designer. You grew. You really advanced. You advanced far into your career with Eileen Fisher, and then you decided to make this new business on the side, effectively during this downtime. Did your business partner have complementary skills to you? How did you guys sort of divide and conquer the tasks required to start a service offering business like Make ANEEW?
Yeah, I think we both are very business oriented. We're always thinking about businesses, new business models. Oh my God, if we were to launch every single business that we come to our hands,
never be still. Yeah.
No, like rest, forget it. No, we're both very business oriented, and our values are very, very strong in relationship to textile waste, right? Carolina, like, I think that she's the efficient, the huge brains of the operation on how to like really scale a lot of these. If I have an idea of how to do something, she takes it and she just kind of like reworks it and make it like exponentially way more efficient, right? She's the one who likes to keep things grounded, you know? I tend to go like super big, and then it's like, and she goes there too, but then she's like, okay, like, let's come down. And then like, what are the baby steps to get there, right? So I think we're very much complementary in that way. Also, it's like, think about it, when we onboard a client, we're both very much involved in every step of the operation, but I'm very much involved in the design process, right? And she does too. But when we go into production, she kind of leads the way. She leads production, right? So we're both very much kind of like complement each other, and I'm like a burst of energy, and then she's just more like let's calm down.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was some of the hardest learning curves when you started your own business that you didn't expect? Was the sort of financial operations behind making that happen, or the administrative components of entrepreneurship something new to you guys, or how did you guys get over that hump?
I think, we haven't had a lot of bumps, in these, because I think the number one bump for us right now which is the biggest challenge that we're facing in the 3 years or coming to 4 that we are in business, is that how do we grow it sustainably? And not by sustainably, not talking about the environment. How do you grow a business to be sustainable, financially sustainable in the long run, right? Because we don't pay ourselves, right? Okay. So all of the money stays in the company. Every penny that we make stays in the company, and that's how we're being able to keep the business running, right? So those are the questions that we're making. How does it look like for Carolina to come full time? What does it take? So we can start growing more and taking more clients, because right now, one of the other good challenges that we have is that we can only take about 1, max 2 clients at the time, because how small we are, and there's demand, and sometimes we just have to say no to clients.
And that's fair to say how manual the process is, correct?
Exactly.
To repair.
Yeah. So that's the biggest challenge. But honestly, working together it's actually a pleasure, because she's my best friend. She's like my sister. Her family is my family in the United States. It's like, when we spend so much hours, even on the weekends, we spend all weekends together, sometimes working on these. It doesn't feel like work, because we're together. We just have a good time. I mean, sometimes, on a Saturday at 12 a.m., we're like, why are we doing this to ourselves? But then we also take time to go out and have fun and, travel. So, it's a lot of time put into these. And if you don't like your co-founder, I don't know. I mean, now I understand why a lot of people crack, co-founders just totally like.
It's a tough relationship.
Yeah. Because if you don't have that really nice balance between the two of them, you spend so much hours with each other,
Absolutely. And to build a business together, it's something that requires so much trust between you two. I mean, I remember when I was starting my first brand back many years ago, my business partner and I, he was like, the trust and communication that you need for that to succeed is like way more than even a lover, it's like, it's so important. And it can create it can break a lot of relationships if that isn't there, so I'm happy to hear that you guys are in a good place with that.
And then, you know what, it's like, it's funny because we joke that we're married. We're literally married. We have bank accounts together, we have a house together. I think we're way more married than joking, but like, it's like, this trust is huge. And the thing that we said, the two of us, before we even sign the LLC, was like, our friendship is way more important than this business. So, if there was a point where my friendship, I'm about to lose her friendship because of the business, I'd rather close Make ANEEW in a heartbeat than lose her friendship. So I think that also keeps us afloat,
That's good. That's great. That's great that you guys have that, and you found each other in life,
Yeah.
Carmen, going back to the business component of this, though, I mean, for those that don't know, Eileen Fisher does tours of their remake factory in New York, and I was lucky enough to actually take a tour with Carmen a few months ago, and I got to see the different components of where the clothes come in, how it's sorted, how it's divided, how you guys choose which avenue the clothes go into, depending on the context and the content and whatnot. This Make ANEEW business that you have, is it a similar sort of operation as the factory that I saw, but just inputting multiple different brands in at once? Can you discuss to me the difference between Eileen Fisher's repair factory and Make ANEW's operations?
I mean, the concept could be similar, but the process is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, Eileen Fisher, we're only taking Eileen Fisher garments, and we take about 25,000 units per month from our customers, which is a lot. And for Make ANEEW, and I'm okay, going back to the factory. So yeah, the factory has a sortation area, right? It has the sorters. It has, I work with the product development team, who's like the sample making room, who does our production for repair and our remanufactured collections. And then for fiber recycling, basically a lot of people in the company touches that operation. So that's a huge operation, right? For Make ANEEW, we have our small studio in Westchester, right? Where it's just, we have like sewing machines, we have one cutting room table, and for smaller productions, we do in the studio. For larger operations, we have factory partners in New York City that support that. So for example, one of our clients was H&M, so we could not do that production in our studio, so we produced that with a factory in New York City. So again, the difference also is that we only receive a small amount of the inventory that we're going to be using at that time for that project. So it's not that we have to sort constantly through garments. So the garments come, we sort, we clean. So the operation is technically the same, but like super small scale, and for different clients. Yeah.
Silly question, but when it comes to like cleaning the clothes that you get back, do you have like an industrial wash and dryer? I mean, how does that work? I think cleaning clothes, when you think about companies' take back programs, cleaning is a big stage of that before it can go back to being a product for a customer. Can you enlighten us a little bit more about how the cleaning process looks like for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk for both Eileen Fisher and Make ANEEW. So for Eileen Fisher, and I actually have to say, we're one of the few, if not the only take-back program that cleans garments before they resell. Because when you go to a Goodwill or ThredUp, no one cleans garments.
Think about that the next time you buy something from one of those businesses.
I mean, or wash it immediately when you get home.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, wash it before you wear it. Like, it's
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Although I have to be guilty as charged. Sometimes when I buy like outerwear that is so cool and it's vintage, I don't wash it.
I get that. That's fair enough.
I take the risk. Anyway, so for Eileen Fisher, we have a local cleaner partner in Westchester who comes and, every Monday comes and picks up the garments that we're going to be cleaning. And then for Make ANEEW, again, because even for repair, remanufacture, we clean the garments because, it's like even you're using the garment as fabric, right? So it has to be clean. So we use local laundromats. And then we have also, because it's getting bigger by volume, we have partnered with cleaners, like not a cleaners, like a wash and fold company that comes and picks it up for us. So, so we are not, us, or like we tend to have freelancers that sometimes they go and wash the clothing for us.
Oh, wow.
So we're kind of like a mom and pop operation, but trying to streamline it. So this wash and fold partnership is like actually really nice.
I can't help but think about all the economic opportunities economic activity that goes around these two operations. It's very manual. Not only the people who are sewing and dividing all that stuff, but washing and cleaning. And it's that's the thing about fashion in general, is that it's such a tactile and such a physical business. It's not a digital code or software that you can so scalable. Like every garment is touched by hundreds of hands constantly. And so,
Although I do have to say, I won't say much because we're just beginning, but we're working on a software on how to streamline all of these.
Okay.
All of these. Putting our brains into into a
Yeah.
software.
Well, I mean to that point though, I mean how can we, and I say we, I mean really you and your constituents, but really scale this remanufacturing services, because as we understand that like circularity is an integral part to really achieving our goals when it comes to fighting climate change, and the climate crisis, and keeping resources at scale, because we are consuming so many natural resources at an unprecedented rate as compared to, I just read a report the other day about the amount of material consumed in the 21st century alone has almost surpassed all material consumed in the 20th century, you know, in just 25 years, not even. And so really prioritizing, not just in fashion, but across any business model, the importance of reusing materials. Um, you know, that being said, circularity has been such a buzzword over the last couple of years, but seeing it go into practice and seeing it go into scale has been a challenge. So, from your perspective, Carmen, how do you see remanufacturing and circularity services like yours scaling in the future? And what are those roadblocks that are immediately in front of you guys to growing to the next stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general it's technology, right? Technology is going to help scale and streamline this operation, whether, repair, remanufacture, fiber to fiber recycling. Um, for us, because the biggest part of our business right now is remanufacturing,
Mm-hmm.
everything is in our head, right? From the design, from the sortation, the design, all the way to making a sample. All of that process, so intricate, is in our brains. So that process right now depends on us, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're training someone for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we're beginning to work actually, on how do we pass all of the things that we have, all the IP, right? If you want to say, from our brain to a software. So it's easy flow between the inventory that you have all the way to cutting production.
Mm-hmm.
And there's already so many technologies out there that you can plug in and kind of like make this master
Yeah.
software that helps throughout all of these process. So that's going to help us streamline this operation. And at the same time, the main reason why also we're doing this is because it's pretty costly, at least in the United States, right? So if we streamline this operation, we will have also a lot more clients, right? Because the demand of clients that come to us, it's big. But when they find out about the pricing, the labor, then they're like, oh, wait a minute, no.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're always thinking like, how can we reduce the cost of this operation? And I think technology is going to help us do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the same goes for fiber recycling, like for circularity in general, right? I think fiber recycling is resell fiber recycling, are one of the biggest kind of like levers to really help close
Mm-hmm.
the loop.
Mm-hmm.
We need more technology to really help, use all of those garments and, separate the fibers and make new material from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of technology out there, but a lot of it is also at the lab stages, so how do we
Mm-hmm.
kind of like keep incentivizing that, and all of the systems along the way to help support fiber recycling or to help support remanufacturing,
Mm-hmm.
the collectors, the sortations, the pre-processors, you name it. It's a whole
For
post-consumer supply
sure.
chain.
For sure. For sure. Carmen, there's so many like tangential questions I have about this whole thing specifically. I mean, what is, when you think of remanufacturing, what a lot of people think of is, or rather comes about, is a very patchworked designed product, right? Because you're using, as you said, old garments as the materials for new products. And you see in variations, this come about. Some of it can be very loud in its patchwork design. Some of it can be a lot more subtle. But nevertheless, I've seen a limited amount of options when it comes to remanufactured design in the market. And I could be wrong, but from what I've experienced, there's a limited array as opposed to these plethora of options out there, a newly designed product from virgin material. What can you say about that, and how can we create effectively a culture that wants those products, as that type of design being appreciated by this in the zeitgeist more than a small niche of people who are a bit more sustainably focused.
You just really are asking one of my most passionate questions about remanufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's like, how do you use remanufacturing beyond a trend,
Mm-hmm.
right? Patchwork is a trend that sometimes comes and goes,
Yeah.
and it's associated with upcycling. People love using the word upcycling, right? So for me, when I started working at Eileen Fisher, it was like, how do we make garments that they do not look like they're made out of garments, so we can actually start putting them into the line and not even really making a big deal out of it. You just label, on the care and content label, this is made out of garments, and the content of the fiber or whatever. So that has been one of my biggest passions at Eileen Fisher. And I think we've achieved it. We do create, but I mean, there's a lot of repetition on materials and styles by the thousands that we get at Eileen Fisher that allows that, right? So we do t-shirts, we do, jumpsuits and jackets that you literally grab them and you're like, I had no idea that this was made out of garments. The design is elevated. It's simple. There's a lot of seams, but you have to play with the seams in the design, accordingly.
Yeah.
So I think it can be done. I think I think people haven't explored it that much, when I think we have done this for so long that we can make garments that don't look like patchy, and then for Make ANEEW, we have to go for what the client wants, right? And sometimes when clients come, they mostly have an idea in mind that upcycling is patchwork, but we have proof the otherwise. And what I'm going to say is that the most important thing here for you not to end up having the typical patchwork style, so you have to work backwards from what you were trained as a designer. As a designer, you start with, your designs, right? Like, I want to make this dress. And then you go into the fabric, right? You're like, okay, maybe I want it in pink. And because you have, to your point, you have all these options. But when you're doing remanufacturing, you have to work the opposite way. You have to start with your inventory. The inventory will dictate more or less what you can do, right? You might already have an idea of like, okay, I want to make this dress, but like, what is the inventory that you have available, right? That's why there's so many small designers that come in our way. They're like, oh, we started this small brand, we used to thrift here and there, like these beautiful pieces, and we put them together. Now they're like, booming, and people want more. We want to scale this. How do we do that? And we're like, well, that's hard, because you don't have access to that inventory at scale. If you would have started with inventory and then designed into it, then you could have scaled that operation and not do patchy stuff. So I think it's how people are trained on design.
From a cultural perspective and from a consumer's perspective, right? What should brands be doing to encourage that type of demand for upcycled or remanufactured circular products more than what they're doing now? Why haven't brands sort of brought in more circular and remanufacturing practices into their mainline and left it at that, instead of just only putting it into a sustainability or a sustainable product line sort of category? I feel like it's a slightly limiting component to this, but maybe you have a different take.
It has a lot of challenges, the same way that I'm telling you that you have to design backwards. It's like, even for the garments that Eileen Fisher that we made, that they're technically the same color, the same style, different sizes, colors might be slightly, the blacks might be slightly off, so, or for example, if you start doing colors, even if it's the same style, but you have reds like maybe all of those reds are going to be different from garment to garment, right? So how do you communicate that to the customer? So maybe then you start going into single SKU fulfillment, and that's very costly, right? Your buying team has to adapt to what you're offering them, not they come and tell you what they want. So I think the system is not, it's different. So you need a different mindset to integrate these. So designers, not every designer, is keen to design with this in mind. It's a very restrictive process, right? Which I love. I think it's way more creative. So I think, and on top of that, people tend to think because you're making garments out of garments is cheaper. It is not, especially if you're making them in the United States, right? Labor is costly. And then on top of that, you add the cost of the goods, right? If you buy them from a textile recycler, chances are that you're going to pay $2 to $5 per piece, right? So that adds to material costs. So it tends to be higher, the price from a regular, like a brand new garment, especially if you're a fast fashion company, it's like, so yeah, there's more challenges than.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and that's the unfortunate reality of sustainability, is that you scratch the surface and it just starts to become a spiral of variables that you don't really understand. You didn't think about the first time, and in the world of LCAs and corporate carbon footprints, a response that a lot of us give is, to questions that the client thinks is a yes or no, it's, well, it depends, and then it depends on X, Y, and Z. Something you said earlier that I want to harper on or question is, you said that brands shouldn't be responsible for like the remanufacturing of it, and they don't own the factories, so why should they own the second life component to their products? What is the onus on brands for taking responsibility for the products that they produce once it's done with the initial life of this product in the hands of the customer?
Yeah. So to the first part of the question, so if we really want to scale this operation, you should not own your factories. You should not own this operation. There should be actually factory remanufacturers or recyclers who actually offer these services for you, not only you, for multiple brands. So I think for economics of scale, we have to build that post-consumer supply chain that offers these. And now we're seeing it, right? Like there's a lot of resale platform providers, there's a lot of third life, service providers too, who offer from sortation all the way to repair. We're not the only ones now. So that when that grows, I think more companies are going to be more keen into jumping and really adding these into their budgets, because it's clear for them now, hey, if I want to take back from, I can work with these ones. If we want to do a remanufactured collection, then these are the providers. I think right now there's so much confusion on who does what, and there's very few players, and it's very costly. So brands are very confused. I talk to so many brands, and they're like, can you lay it for me, please? Who are my key players? Who are the ones who I should be going to? And like, so I think we're in the beginning of building that. And I think that's how we are going to scale it. And I think that's very important. For Eileen Fisher, for us, we do it in-house because I think we have such a robust operation and we have so much expertise and talent in-house that we have tried going out there and working with service providers, but at the end, we always come back in-house, because again, we've done it for so long that we have the knowledge in-house to do it.
Yeah.
So yes, companies should be responsible for offering solutions for the clothes that their customers no longer want. And I think it should be in one or two ways, right? The way kind of like what Eileen Fisher were doing, where we directly are responsible for those garments. We take them back, we process them internally, we resell, or we do something if you can resell them. So that's in-house. We're responsible for that. Or the other one is like, at least the company has to be able to provide a platform for the customer to offload or dispose of that garment responsibly. And that doesn't mean that they have to do it in-house the way that we're doing it, Eileen Fisher. They can have a partnership with a third-party provider, like, for example, like a Goodwill or like a ThreadUp or a Poshmark, right? Tell your customer, hey, when you no longer want your your garment, these are the outlets that you can do to dispose of those garments. So I think that's the level of responsibility that a company should be doing.
I'm curious to know your take on the role of legislation and regulation in the fashion industry specifically. And what I mean by that is, what type of laws do you agree with when it comes to government's influence in the private sector? Extended producer responsibility acts, for example, and other types of like taxations and ways that the government can push for certain action. And do you think that regulation is an answer to or a necessity in this fight against, fight against climate change? We'll put it that way.
I will say regulation right? It's not the only. Regulation is not the only solution. I think it's a compilation of a lot of things. I think right now, I am pro-regulation, but I'm pro-regulation, EPR, that incentivizes brands, right, to be part of the circular economy. I'm not for pro-regulation or EPRs that are like penalizing brands for not doing things, right? I'm always a very positive person, so I feel like I believe in positive reinforcement. So, for example, if a brand like Eileen Fisher is doing a take-back program, we're offering all of these services. Can we get like tax incentives? Can we get, all other incentives for us doing that, rather than us having to pay money because we're not complying to their rules, which are not perfect, especially, talking about California's bill, the SB 707, which is basically a collector's bill, right? We have a pretty robust take-back program, but at the end of the day, if that, it passed the Senate already, and it's waiting to be signed by the governor. But like, if it passes the way it is right now, we still be paying money. And, we're one of the biggest take-back programs. We're still going to be penalized, for these things that we will not even have the control on what to do with those garments. At the end of the day, is up to the pro to decide where those garments are going to end up, right? So the values of those people making the decision for those garments might not meet our values, right? So I think I'm pro EPR, but I think it has to be one that really accounts for the industry's voice and really one that incentivizes rather than really punishes brands.
What do you think of, and I don't think there's any regulation out there that does this at this point, or at least, pushing for this, but, when we think about the problems of the fashion industry and, acknowledging that a lot of them have, that brands and designers specifically have a huge role in those issues, do you see any sort of like rules or mandates for either recycled material or natural materials or avoidance of synthetics and whatnot to reduce our usage of fossil fuel derived products, etc., as like a good thing? Should there be a mandate for designing end of life into the product? I'm trying to think of ways that, pressure is put onto the designers to create products that are a bit more conducive to a better future, more circular economy. But again, like there's a line between what, just mandating ridiculous rules that limit creative expression and, versus mandating rules that mandate things that we need for the environment. So your thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, to be transparent, I'm not so much involved in all of these legislation and bills that are happening right now. I'm kind of more knowledgeable on SB 707 because of the nature of my work, but I'm pretty far removed from it. But I know that the Fashion Act is really working towards like a more sustainable industry through chemistry, material sustainability. So I think those will be very important, for the industry to really push brands and designers to really choose the right materials, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have the power, to design something that either is going to end up in a landfill or not. So, yeah.
From a higher level perspective, and we may have touched on this a little bit throughout this conversation, but the purpose of this call is to really take our listeners through the entire value chain of the fashion life cycle, but in this case, from a textile to a manufacturer to a brand to throughout the whole life cycle. Carmen, what should brands be doing with the suppliers and the manufacturers, the stakeholders that they immediately touch, to reduce their environmental impact, their suppliers' environmental impact, right? And at the same time, on the other side of the coin, what is the responsibility and the act that brands and designers like yourself should be doing with consumers to reduce their consumers' environmental impact with the use of their clothes?
Yeah, I think brands have the responsibility to, first of all, work with the right manufacturers or partners that really follow their guidelines, their values, right? Their goals towards like a more sustainable future, right? And, even at Eileen Fisher, we support a lot of factories transition to either fair trade, right? Or, from coal to renewable energy, it's really work with them. How do we together, because we're a partner to them, how can we support each other, us reduce our GHG, and them really bring that factory to the next level, so they can not just offer that to us, but to other people in the industry. So it's really working together to really elevate, their processes. And then for the consumers, the consumers will reduce their environmental impact if you reduce your environmental impact through the product that you offer them, right? So it's more about education. It's like caring for your clothes, what to do with the garment when you no longer want it. It's like responsible consumption. I think it's the biggest educational tool that a brand has to do with their consumer. Yeah.
That makes sense. And more brands should be taking up the Eileen Fisher sort of doctrine of operations. But Carmen, one last question before I let you go. You are a busy woman, as we've just discussed. You have your hands full with a lot of different projects going on at Eileen Fisher and Make ANEEW and the like. But what does success look like for you, both on a personal and on a professional level, in the next 5 to 10 years?
Success for me is like, family for me is my driver, right? My family. It's like everything that I do is basically for them, right? Yeah. So it's like success for me is to help even a tiny bit, the planet be in better shape. I have 7 nephews and nieces. Like, I want them to enjoy this planet. I'm from Mexico. The water is so scarce there. It's like, what can I do to help them have a better future? So that's my driver. And success will look like in 5 years, I have helped streamline, fiber to fiber recycling operations, at least in Eileen Fisher, so more brands can actually follow and we can divert more textiles from landfill. And then for Make ANEEW, these are the professional ones. It's to Make ANEEW is just to continue to grow it, to be a financially viable business that can continue to offer these services at a affordable cost, so more companies can actually be part of the circular economy. And then at the also personal level, to have run the 6 major marathons in the world.
Very cool. I love that. We're coming up soon. What is the next one you have on your radar coming up soon?
It's my first one, New York City.
Hey, start somewhere, man. You gotta start somewhere. Awesome. Well, Carmen, I appreciate you so much, and thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with us. It's been a pleasure chatting with you and learning more about your business and your operation. I look forward to when our paths meet again.
Oh, thank you. It was a really nice conversation.